The barn door exploded open with a crack that echoed across the frozen valley. Charles stumbled backward, ice cracking beneath his boots as wild hooves thundered past his head. The stallion, black as coal, eyes rolling white with terror, reared against the rope, nearly yanking him into the frozen mud. "Easy, boy," Charles gasped, but his hands were already bleeding through torn gloves. The rope burned. The horse screamed. Behind him, 3 ranch hands scattered like tumbleweeds. One shouted something about putting the animal down. Charles's heart seized. He couldn't lose another horse. Not this winter. Not when the bank already had its claws in his land. The stallion charged the fence. Wood splintered. Charles felt the hope draining from his chest like water through a sieve. Then he heard it. A voice. Low, steady, impossibly calm. A woman's voice, cutting through the chaos like a hymn through gunfire. "Let go of the rope, Charles." He turned. A figure stood at the barn entrance, silhouetted against the December sun. Snow clung to her dark traveling coat. Her face was lined with years he couldn't count. But her eyes, sharp as winter stars, held something that made him obey, without question. Ashley, the Christmas bride the circuit preacher had arranged. 50 years old, the letter said. No family, no ties. Just a widow, looking for a quiet life. Charles released the rope. The stallion bolted straight toward her. If you've ever felt the weight of watching everything you've built crumble in your hands, staying with us now means everything. Let us know where you're watching from. Your voice keeps stories like this alive. What happened next would change everything. 2 weeks earlier, Charles had sat in the dim corner of the Silver Pine Saloon, staring at a letter he'd paid a scribe to write. His hands shook as he sealed it. Advertising for a bride at 27. The barkeep had laughed. "Boy, you must be desperate." Desperate didn't begin to cover it. The ranch, 300 acres his father had died protecting, was drowning in debt. The winter had come early and mean. Half his herd was already lost to the cold. The bank wanted payment by Christmas, and Charles had nothing left to sell but the land itself. The circuit preacher had mentioned a widow in Sacramento, respectable, hard-working. "She's older," he'd warned, 50 years, but she's got grit and she don't ask questions. Charles hadn't cared about age. He needed help. Someone to manage the house while he fought to save the animals. Someone who wouldn't run when things got ugly. The telegram came 3 days before Christmas. Arriving December 24th. Train at noon. a.m. Now watching this grey-haired woman stride toward a raging stallion with the confidence of a general entering battle, Charles wondered what kind of fool arrangement he'd actually made. Ashley didn't run, didn't flinch. She simply raised one weathered hand, palm out, and began to hum. The stallion skidded to a stop 6 feet from her, nostrils flaring, hooves dancing on ice. Charles's breath caught in his throat. What was she? The humming continued, low, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat set to melody. Ashley took 1 step forward, then another. The stallion's ears swiveled toward her, the whites of his eyes still showing, but the panic was draining away, like water from a broken dam. Charles stood frozen, rope burns screaming across his palms. The other ranch hands had stopped running. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Ashley moved closer. Her hand extended slowly, fingers open, non-threatening. She wasn't looking at the horse's eyes. She was watching his chest, his breathing, the subtle language of muscle and fear. "He's not wild," she said quietly, never breaking her rhythm. "He's terrified." Charles found his voice. "Ma'am, that horse has thrown every man who's tried, because every man tried to break him." Ashley's tone was matter-of-fact, almost gentle. You don't break fear, Charles. You understand it. The stallion's muzzle dropped an inch, then another. His breathing began to match the cadence of her humming. She touched his neck. Just a whisper of contact. The horse shuddered, but didn't bolt. Where did you learn that? Charles breathed. Ashley's expression flickered, something old and painful crossing her face like a shadow. I've spent 30 years with creatures no one else could reach, she paused. Horses aren't so different from people. They just can't lie about their wounds. The stallion lowered his head completely, pressing his forehead against her shoulder. Charles felt something shift in his chest, a crack in the ice he'd been carrying. Then Ashley turned to him, and her face had gone pale. Charles, how many horses do you have left? Charles led Ashley through the barn, his stomach twisting tighter with every step. The smell hit first: sickness, rot, desperation. 12 stalls, only 5 still occupied. The horses inside stood with heads low, ribs showing through dull coats. Eyes glazed with the same defeat Charles saw in the mirror each morning. Influenza? Ashley asked, already moving toward the nearest stall. Vet said so. Came through 6 weeks ago. Lost 9 horses. These 5. Charles swallowed hard. They're hanging on, but barely. Can't afford medicine. Can't afford feed that might help. His voice cracked. I've been trying everything I know, but I'm losing them. Ashley knelt beside a gray mare, running her hands along the horse's neck, her touch professional, searching. This isn't influenza. Charles blinked. What? Respiratory infection, yes, but the vet missed something. Ashley stood, her jaw set. These horses aren't dying from disease. They're dying from heartbreak. Ma'am, I don't... Where did you keep them before the sickness? The south pasture, near the creek. They had shelter, good grass. Did you separate them when the first one got sick? Charles nodded. The vet said to isolate them. I moved them here, kept them apart. Ashley's eyes closed. Oh, Charles, horses are herd animals. You isolated them right when they needed each other most. She turned to face him fully. They're not dying of infection. They're dying of loneliness. The words hit Charles like a fist to the chest. Before he could respond, a commotion erupted outside, men shouting, wagon wheels crunching through snow. Charles looked through the barn door and felt his blood turn to ice. The bank had arrived early. The banker stepped down from his carriage like a vulture landing on carrion. Morton Hayes, slick suit, gold watch chain, smile sharp enough to gut a man at 20 paces. Behind him, 2 deputies flanked the barn entrance. Charles Sullivan. Hayes's voice carried that false warmth Charles had learned to hate. Merry Christmas Eve. Mr. Hayes. Charles stepped into the doorway, blocking the view of the dying horses inside. We're 2 days from the deadline. About that. Hayes pulled a document from his coat. I'm afraid the terms have changed. Bank needs payment today, in full. Charles's world tilted. That's not what we agreed. Market conditions, my boy. Unstable times. We need to secure our assets. Hayes's eyes slid past Charles toward Ashley. Besides, I heard you've been making arrangements, taking on new obligations. Wife, is it? That changes your financial picture considerably. Ashley stepped forward, her weathered face calm but her eyes blazing. I'm no obligation, Mr. Hayes. I'm a partner. Hayes chuckled. Ma'am, no disrespect, but at your age... At my age, Ashley interrupted. I've survived 3 husbands, 2 droughts, and more entitled men than I care to count. You want this land, but you'll get it over my cold body. Something in her voice, made the deputies shift uncomfortably. Charles felt a desperate plan forming. "Give us until sunset. I'll get you your money." Hayes smiled. "Charles, you couldn't raise that sum if you sold every stick on this property." "Maybe not." Ashley's voice dropped to something dangerous. "But I can save his horses. And when word spreads what I can do, every rancher in 3 counties will pay gold to learn it." Hayes laughed outright. "You? Save those broken-down nags?" Ashley's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Want to make a wager on it? If you've ever carried a secret so heavy it bent your spine, staying here with us is the only way to see it finally lifted. Tell us where you're watching from. Your presence in this moment matters more than you know." The banker's expression changed. He'd just realized he might be facing something he couldn't buy. Hayes glanced at his deputies, then back at Ashley with the calculating look of a man smelling opportunity. "What kind of wager?" Ashley didn't hesitate. "Give Charles until Christmas morning, 36 hours. If I can get all 5 horses healthy enough to stand in harness and pull a loaded wagon, you tear up that debt. The ranch is his, free and clear." The deputies exchanged glances. One whispered, "Those horses can barely stand now." "And if you fail," Hayes interrupted, his smile returning, "then you take the land tonight. No argument, no legal delays." Ashley's voice was iron. "But you also pay for my train ticket back to Sacramento." Charles grabbed her arm. "Ashley, you can't promise." She met his eyes, and he saw something there that stopped his protest cold. Certainty, the kind that came from knowing things other people couldn't fathom. Hayes pulled out his pocket watch, making a show of checking the time. "It's 3 o'clock now. Christmas morning, sunrise. That's about 15 hours. He snapped the watch shut. "Mrs. Sullivan, you have yourself a deal. Deputies will witness." The men shook hands. Hayes tipped his hat, that vulture smile wider now. "I'll return at dawn with the wagon. Better start praying for a Christmas miracle." He climbed back into his carriage. "Merry Christmas, Charles. Enjoy your last night on your father's land." The carriage rolled away, leaving deep ruts in the snow. Charles turned on Ashley, panic and anger warring in his chest. "What have you done? Those horses can't even eat properly, let alone pull a loaded wagon in 15 hours. Ashley walked back toward the barn, her voice carrying over her shoulder. "Then we'd better get started. And Charles?" She paused at the door. "You're going to have to trust me on something that will sound completely insane." His stomach dropped. "What?" "We're putting all 5 horses back together. Tonight." Charles paced outside the barn as Ashley rearranged everything he'd been told by the vet. She'd ordered every partition removed, every barrier torn down. Now all 5 horses stood in the center of the barn in a loose circle. So weak they leaned against each other like wounded soldiers. "This is madness," Charles muttered. "If one's still contagious, they're not." Ashley moved between the animals with that same steady confidence, her hands never stopping, touching, stroking, humming that strange melody. The infection's past. What's killing them is isolation. Watch. The gray mare, the weakest, lifted her head slightly and exhaled against the neck of the bay gelding beside her. The gelding's ear swiveled toward her, a small thing, barely noticeable. But Ashley smiled like she'd witnessed a resurrection. "Now we give them what medicine can't." She pulled a worn leather journal from her traveling bag, its pages stuffed with pressed herbs and handwritten notes. "This is 30 years of learning how animals heal each other. The circuit doctors called me crazy. The vets called me a witch." Her voice hardened. "I've been run out of 3 towns for refusing to let animals die alone." Charles stared at the journal. "What's in there?" Remedies, yes. Herbal tinctures for respiratory support. But more important, touch patterns, herd behaviors, the science of companionship. She looked up at him. Charles, I've watched horses heal wounds through grooming each other that would have killed them in isolation. I've seen grieving horses stop eating until they're reunited with their herd. Your vet treated bodies. I treat souls. One of the ranch hands appeared in the doorway. Boss, sun's setting. You really think this'll work? Charles looked at the 5 dying horses, now pressed together in the amber light, their breathing synchronized. Then Ashley whispered, They're already healing. Look at their eyes. The glaze was lifting. Something was returning, something that looked almost like hope. But outside, the temperature was dropping fast, and Christmas morning was coming, whether they were ready or not. Midnight came and went. Charles and Ashley worked in shifts, keeping the barn warm, administering Ashley's tinctures, wild cherry bark for the cough, elecampane root for the lungs, and something she called companion tea, which she had the horses drink from a shared trough. Why shared? Charles asked, exhausted. Scent, taste, connection. Ashley's voice was hoarse from humming for hours. They need to remember they're a herd again. By 2 in the morning, the grey mare, who hadn't stood fully in days, rose shakily to her feet. Charles felt tears sting his eyes. The bay gelding followed. Then the others, one by one, like dominoes of hope, falling in reverse. Ashley sagged against a post, and Charles saw how much this was costing her. The lines around her eyes had deepened. Her hands trembled. Why did you agree to this? He asked quietly. You could have just walked away. Found another arrangement. You don't owe me anything. Ashley was silent for a long moment, staring at the horses. 30 years ago, I had a husband who beat me senseless. I ran with nothing but the clothes on my back. Her voice was steady but distant. First place I found work was a stable. The owner, old man named Jacob, he saw I was broken. He said, Sometimes the best way to heal yourself is to help something more broken. She turned to Charles, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. He taught me everything. Taught me that animals don't lie, don't manipulate, don't pretend. They hurt, they heal, or they die, and they do it honest. She swallowed hard. He died 5 years ago. Left me enough to survive, but not enough to keep helping. So I've been traveling, taking work where I can, teaching where people will listen. And the preacher's arrangement? I thought maybe I'd found a place to stop running. Her smile was sad. Then I got here and saw you were running too, just from different demons. Before Charles could respond, one of the horses nickered, a sound stronger than any they'd made in weeks. Dawn was 2 hours away. Christmas morning arrived in shades of pearl and frost. Charles stood in the barn doorway, watching the sky lighten, his heart hammering against his ribs. Behind him, the 5 horses stood together, breathing steady, eyes clear. They looked alive. But could they work? Ashley appeared at his shoulder, her face drawn but determined. Time to harness them. Ashley, if we push them too hard, we won't. Her voice was certain. They'll tell us if it's too much. We just have to listen. They worked in tandem, fitting harnesses that hadn't been used in weeks. The horses accepted the leather without fight, their ears forward, alert. Charles felt a flutter of hope so fragile it hurt. By the time Hayes' carriage rolled up at sunrise, the 5 horses stood in formation, hitched to Charles's largest freight wagon. The wagon bed was loaded with every sack of grain Charles had left, easily 1/2 ton. Hayes stepped down slowly, his confident smile faltering. "Well, I'll be damned." "Language, Mr. Hayes," Ashley said sweetly. "It's Christmas." Hayes circled the team, his practiced eye assessing. Charles held his breath. The horses stood firm, but he could see the faint tremor in the grey mare's legs. They were stronger, yes, but were they strong enough? "Hitch them up all you like," Hayes said finally. "But can they pull? That's the wager. A loaded wagon. Let's see them move it 10 yards. Then we'll talk about debts." Charles climbed onto the driver's seat, reins in shaking hands. Ashley stood beside the lead horse, her hand on his neck. "Trust them," she whispered, "and they'll trust you." Charles clicked his tongue, flicked the reins gently. "Walk on." For one terrible second, nothing happened. Then the grey mare leaned into her collar. The bay beside her followed. The wagon creaked and moved. 1 step, 2, 5. 10 yards became 20. The horses pulled together. Their breathing synchronized, their movements a single fluid unit. Hayes's face went white as the snow. Charles pulled the team to a halt, then turned to face the banker, barely daring to believe. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Hayes." Hayes stood speechless for a full minute, watching the horses cool down, their breath steaming in the morning light. Finally, he reached into his coat and pulled out the deed papers. "I'm a man of my word." His voice was tight. "The debt is cleared." He thrust the papers at Charles. "Though I'll be damned if I understand how you pulled this off." Ashley smiled gently. "That's because you've spent your whole life counting numbers, Mr. Hayes. Some things can't be measured in ledgers." Hayes shook his head, climbed back into his carriage, and left without another word, his deputies trailing behind like scolded children. The moment they disappeared over the ridge, Charles collapsed against the wagon wheel, the deed clutched in his shaking hands. Relief crashed over him so hard his vision blurred. Ashley knelt beside him. "You all right?" "I just—" Charles looked up at her, this grey-haired woman who'd arrived a stranger and saved everything he loved. "How can I ever repay you?" "You don't." Ashley's voice was soft but firm. "You do what Jacob taught me. You help the next broken thing that crosses your path. And you do it honest." Charles nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. As the sun climbed higher, painting the snow gold, the horses gathered around them in a loose circle. No longer separate, no longer dying, but together, whole. Ashley reached out and took Charles's hand. Not romantically, just human. Two people who'd been running from different demons and found each other at the exact moment they both needed saving. "So," Charles said finally, his voice still rough, "this arrangement, the preacher's letter, was the best mistake I ever made." Ashley smiled. "What do you say we make it a partnership instead? I teach you what I know about healing. You teach me about holding steady in one place." Charles squeezed her hand. "Deal." In the distance, church bells rang out across the valley, calling Christmas morning into being. If this story found you when you needed it most, stay a while longer with us. We'll keep bringing you moments like this, where broken things heal and unlikely people become family. Let us know where you're